Something happened in the same decade that no one has placed in the same sentence. In the 18-teens and the 1820s, the name Tartaria began disappearing from European maps, not in the way that old geographic terminology fades, gradually, imprecisely, leaving traces in footnotes and marginal annotations. It disappeared in the specific way that administrative cartography replaces a single vast, unnamed thing with a collection of smaller, more manageable parts. Muscovite Tartary, Chinese Tartary, independent Tartary. The cartographers of the early 19th century did not stop drawing the territory. They subdivided it, labeled its components, replaced the wide-open name with the names of the things that were moving into it. Russian governorates, Qing administrative regions, British survey lines advancing east. The name that had sat across the eastern hemisphere of the world's most authoritative atlases for 200 years became, within a generation, a term requiring explanation. In the same decade, on the 27th of January, 1820, a Russian naval officer named Bellingshausen stood on the deck of the sloop Vostok in the Southern Ocean and looked at something vast and white on the horizon. He was a cartographer by training. He had sailed on the first Russian circumnavigation of the Earth. He had been dispatched by Tsar Alexander I with specific orders to explore the Southern Ocean and find land in proximity to the South Pole. He was precisely the kind of man who was supposed to know what he was looking at. He wrote 2 words in his expedition journal. He wrote them in Russian. The words were Matioroi Liod. They mean approximately hard ice, or solid ice, or if you press the etymology, Mother Ice, Materik being the Russian word for continent, the phrase hovering at the boundary between a description of frozen water and a description of land. Bellingshausen was looking at what we now know to be the Antarctic continent, within 20 miles of its coast. He wrote 2 words that could mean he had found it, or could mean he had found nothing but ice. And then he went home and wrote in a formal report to the Russian Naval Ministry that the southern continent probably did not exist. The largest named territory in the history of European cartography vanished from the maps. And the man sent to find what lay at the bottom of the world found something and could not say what it was. Matioroi Liod. Perhaps those 2 facts belong in entirely separate conversations. Perhaps the coincidence of their timing is just that, the early 19th century being a period of rapid geographic revision across the board, and it is not strange that old labels would be replaced and new continents would be found within the same generation. Perhaps placing them together is the kind of pattern making that the mind performs automatically and without permission, finding connections in the noise because the mind was built to find connections. But the phrase stays with you. Hard ice, Mother Ice, a continent that might not exist. Written by a man who was sent to find it, who perhaps found it, and who then said it was not there. The name Tartaria appears in European maps from the 14th century. It is documented in European literature even earlier. The Italian Franciscan Giovanni da Pian del Carpine reached Karakorum in 1245 as the first European ambassador to the Great Khan, and his account uses the name with the confidence of something already established. By 1570, Abraham Ortelius had built it into the foundation of the world's first modern atlas. The Theatrum Orbis Terrarum was printed in 6 languages and distributed across all of literate Europe. It dedicated a full map to the territory, labeled Tartariae sive magni chami regni, Tartaria or the Kingdom of the Great Khan, and described the territory as extending from the Volga River and the Caspian Sea in the west to the Pacific Ocean in the east, bounded in the south by Persia, India, and China, and open to the Arctic in the north. It is not a vague label appended to empty space. It has internal structure. It has named provinces and rivers and, in later editions, named cities. Gerard Mercator included it. Willem Bleu refined it. Nicolas Sanson divided it into subcategories that reflected increasing European knowledge of the region's internal geography. The territory appears on every major European atlas for 200 years. And then it does not. There is no widely accepted account of what happened to it. Not a military campaign that is documented with the precision that military campaigns are documented. Not a treaty carving up the territory with the specificity that such treaties produce. Not a successor state claiming its mantle and explaining its inheritance. The standard explanation is that Tartary was never a political entity at all, only a European cartographic label for the poorly understood nomadic populations of Central Asia and Siberia, a convenience term that became obsolete as European knowledge of the region improved. And this explanation is, in the main, correct. The cartographers were not describing a government. They were describing an emptiness and filling it with a name. But the explanation does not address the maps themselves. The most detailed depictions of Tartaria are not vague. They name provinces, peoples, geographic features, cities. Fra Mauro's 1450 world map places Tartaria across a substantial portion of the known world with the confidence of a place that exists. The Ortelius map carries annotations in Latin describing the extent of the Great Khan's authority with specificity that does not feel like guesswork. Something was being described. Whatever it was being described consistently across independent cartographic traditions over 2 centuries by people who had no obvious motive to invent a territory they knew to be empty. And then it is gone. And in the same decade, Bellingshausen writes Matioroi Liod and sails home and tells his government the southern continent probably does not exist. Bellingshausen's expedition was not improvised. Tsar Alexander I authorized it in 1819. The preparation was meticulous. The 2 ships, the Vostok and the Mirny, carried instruments, libraries, and chronometers, all so precisely calibrated that Bellingshausen noted in his journal that he had found no fewer than 108 errors in the official maritime almanac for that year. He was that kind of man. A man who counted errors in almanacs. A man who had spent his career making maps of things that did not yet have names. He crossed the Antarctic Circle on the 26th of January, 1820. The next day, he recorded Matioroi Liod and noted coordinates that modern analysis places within 20 miles of the Antarctic mainland. He continued east. He returned to Sydney. He wrote his report. He said the southern continent probably did not exist. His expedition was then, for all practical purposes, forgotten. It sat in the archives of the Russian Naval Ministry. It was not considered a discovery of Antarctica. For 129 years, Bellingshausen was not credited with having seen the continent he was sent to find. Then, in 1949, during the Cold War, the Soviet Geographical Society re-examined the expedition documents. Lev Berg, the Society's president, announced that Russian sailors had discovered Antarctica first. The political stakes of the announcement were clear. The scientific content was the same journals and charts that had sat unread for over a century. The same expedition found the continent and could not decide what it had found. The same records that might have established a discovery were not read for over a century. And in the same decade that the expedition sailed, the largest labeled territory in the history of European cartography went quiet without a documented reason. In 2012, Thomas Anastasio and colleagues at the University of Illinois published a study of collective memory consolidation. They proposed that societies form and lose memory by processes structurally analogous to individual brain function, including a phenomenon they called trauma to the social hippocampus, a sudden deep erasure not of distant history, but of recent and vivid memory, the kind of retrograde amnesia in which the most immediate experience is the first thing to go. They offered the Chinese Cultural Revolution as a case study, targeted institutional disruption producing measurable loss of recent collective memory in affected populations. What this framework suggests, applied very carefully and with full awareness that it was not designed for this purpose, is that civilizational forgetting does not require conspiracy. It requires only disruption at the right scale, at the right moment, to the right institutions. The cartographic tradition that had maintained Tartary across 200 years of European atlases was not a single institution. It was a network of knowledge, passed from Ortelius to Mercator to Blaeu to Sanson to Danville, each cartographer inheriting the label from the last. When the Russian and Qing empires expanded into the territory in the 18th century and began producing their own maps with their own administrative names, the external label became unnecessary. It was not erased. It was simply not passed on. Matioroi liod. The phrase returns here with a different weight. Perhaps what Bellingshausen saw on the 27th of January 1820 was exactly what he wrote. Hard ice, solid ice, a wall of frozen water at the edge of the navigable world. Perhaps the ambiguity in his journal is the ambiguity of a careful scientist refusing to claim more than he could prove. Perhaps his report to the Naval Ministry was honest. Perhaps he genuinely did not know if there was a continent beneath the ice. Or perhaps the phrase means something else entirely. Perhaps Matioroi liod is the notation of a man who found what he was sent to find and could not say so. A man standing at the bow of a Russian naval vessel, looking at something vast and solid on the horizon of a continent that his maps had been circling for 200 years without being able to name, writing the two words that said everything and nothing at the same time. Hard ice. Mother ice. The thing at the bottom of the world. Perhaps the Tartarian Empire never fell. Not because it physically relocated itself to Antarctica, that is the mythology version, and the mythology version is too clean, too literal, too easily dismissed. But perhaps what disappeared from the maps of Central Asia in the same decade that Bellingshausen wrote his ambiguous notation was the attention, the center of gravity. 2 centuries of European cartographic tradition that had been pointing east and north toward a vast unmapped territory suddenly began pointing south, toward a coastline that the Phineas map had drawn in 1531, toward a continent that the source maps of Piri Reis had apparently known, toward the Matioroi liod that Bellingshausen found and then disavowed. Perhaps the empire did not move to Antarctica. Perhaps Antarctica was always where the cartographic tradition was pointing, and the name Tartaria was the notation made by people who were looking in the right direction but not quite far enough south. All of this might be wrong in ways that carry real weight. The disappearance of Tartary from European maps is explained by geography and politics, not by the movements of an empire. Russian imperial expansion into Siberia and Central Asia during the 18th century was documented in extraordinary detail. The surveys, the administrative decrees, the governors appointed to newly organized territories. The Qing Empire's consolidation of Mongolia and Manchuria was similarly documented. What replaced the label Tartary was not silence, but specificity. The cartographic tradition did not go dark. It became more precise. That is not erasure. That is progress. Bellingshausen's ambiguity is the ambiguity of a scientist at the edge of his instruments. In difficult weather, at high southern latitudes, the boundary between sea ice and continental ice shelf is genuinely unclear. He wrote what he could verify. He reported what he could confirm. His caution was professional, not political. The Soviet reassessment of his expedition was Cold War geopolitics, not historical revelation. The synchrony of these two events, Tartary's cartographic fade and Antarctica's discovery, is a coincidence that feels significant only to a mind that has decided to connect them. 1949 produced one reassessment in Russia. 1929 produced a different discovery in Istanbul, when a German theologian found the Piri Reis map in a bundle of forgotten parchments. The early 19th century produced many things in many places that do not imply a common origin. The uncertainty is honest. The uncertainty matters. But the uncertainty does not dissolve the journal. It does not dissolve the two words sitting in the Russian State Museum of the Arctic and Antarctic in St. Petersburg. written by the most careful navigator of his generation. On the morning he stood in front of the seventh continent and chose not to say what it was. Bellingshausen lived until 1852. He never returned to the Antarctic. He rose to the rank of admiral. He served as the military governor of Kronstadt. He published his account of the expedition in 1831, 11 years after the voyage, and the account was careful and precise about everything except what had been seen on the 27th of January, 1820. The ambiguity was preserved. The two words were left to mean what they had always meant: everything or nothing, depending on what you were willing to say. He was a cartographer. He spent his life naming things. The seventh continent got two words that could not decide if it was there. Perhaps the empire that disappeared from the maps and the continent that appeared at the bottom of the world in the same decade have nothing to do with each other. Perhaps the timing is coincidence, and the pattern is the mind. Perhaps Bellingshausen looked at ice, and saw ice, and wrote ice, and meant ice, and the southern continent had always been there waiting, and had nothing to do with what was vanishing from the atlases of the northern world in the same season. But in a museum in St. Petersburg, the journal is still there. The coordinates are still there. The date is still there. And on the page for the 27th of January, 1820, there are two words written by a man who was sent to find a continent, who found something, who went home and said it was not there, and who never went back. Matioroi Lyod, hard ice, mother ice, solid land, the empire that never fell, and the continent that was always there, and the notation of a man who stood between them and chose, for reasons that died with him, not to say which one he was looking at. The maps were redrawn. The ice stayed. The journal entry has not changed in 200 years.